Welcome to the Shaman Stories podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy, and today I'm honored to introduce Sadie Whip. With over 35 years of experience as a writer, healer, and mentor, Sadie has guided countless teachers, artists, and seekers around the world. Her work inspires a deep connection to the ecosystem of belonging and encourages us to embrace our authentic magic. Sadie is the author of powerful books like Savage Awakening, Radical Habits, What Love Does, and she's the creator of vibrant communities where witches, healers, and dreamers unite. Thank you for joining, Sadie.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, why don't you go ahead and tell the guests or listeners a little bit about what you do on a day to day practice?
That's always a fun question. I really don't know how to answer that. Whenever people say, "What do you do?" So essentially, I'm a hag, and hag comes from as far as we know, the German word Hexe, which means basically wise woman of the hedge. And that's people who live at the edge of society, who go into the wilds, work with the spirits to get wisdom and bring that back to help people. And I've done that since I was little, basically.
Okay.
And I have always, I'm spirit taught, spirit led, and I've always worked with the spirits and with the idea of just helping people get more connected with the unseen realm and with the natural realm and help humans sort of be human better. And that's kind of it. So I do all types of things that work toward that end.
So, with that, so you mentioned you were spirit led since childhood. So, what was your childhood like? Were you raised with these practices? Did your mom or father do this as well? Was it just something that kind of came across?
Yeah, I grew up on a ranch about 6.5 miles outside of town. We were very poor, spent a lot of time alone in nature. My mom says I just spontaneously started giving massages when I was about 2. When I was 4, I had a spontaneous healing experience with a spider, where I was making mud pies and some mud dropped onto a daddy long leg spider, and I was horrified. I was a very sensitive little kid. And I pulled the mud off, and the spider was just laying there twitching, and I was completely freaked out. And I put my hands over it, and I didn't know what to do. And I just closed my eyes, and I got the sort of impression to put a teeny tiny spider-sized dose of my energy into the spider to sort of help it. I didn't want to shock it. And so I did that, and I just sat there. And when I opened my hands, the spider was fine. My guess is in an adult mind, it was just stunned, and it just needed a minute to kind of recoup. But for me, it was a total miracle, and that relational exchange between the spider and myself, and whatever the wisdom was that answered my heart's call for help, it was miraculous, and that had a profound impact on me. And between that and going out in nature and approaching various beings and them very generously communicating with me how to approach them and teaching me respect for them and their space, and often being very kind lizards and snakes and even like rattlesnakes and possums and oak trees and all kinds of different beings, being willing to show and communicate with me sort of how to be in their presence in ways that were respectful. And sometimes, I had a alligator lizard snap at me pretty hard, and I didn't realize that other beings would do that, and it taught me a lot about boundaries, I didn't get full access to anything I wanted access to and stuff like that. So when I was about 7, I was standing on the dirt driveway in front of our house, and my mom and uncle and aunt were standing talking in a little triage. And I don't know, I was probably 20, 30 feet away from them. And it was like the beginning of summer. So there were the cows grazing in the field, and there, the crabapple tree, and there was like a little white butterfly kind of bobbing along. And I just realized that the three of them were not in the world with the rest of us. And it really somatically just struck me very profoundly that they were not noticing or not living, that they were just very much in a different world. And that connection, I think, just made this stream of other connections, realizing that adults and other people often weren't in the world with the rest of us, but in that moment, I had a conscious experience of it. And I just took a vow right then and there to figure out why so many humans were so disconnected from the rest of us and the rest of reality. And I dove into trying to understand humans better. And I started memorized all the bones in the body and started studying foot reflexology and just really dove into my kind of concentrated study of humans.
Did you go to school for any of that or just kind of on your own?
No, just on my own. Yeah. I I did go to college. I dropped out of high school and started traveling, and then when I in my senior year, I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I started college when I was 28. I loved college, but I was very frustrated with the experience, and I wasn't getting the learnings. I wasn't able to find the kind of learnings that I wanted to find to satisfy what it was that I was wanting to satisfy, and just having to jump through the hoops of like you don't really get to the really good stuff until you've done the bachelor's and then gone through the master's, and then you can kind of study what you want in your PhD program and stuff. And I was like, so I have to pay you guys tens of thousands of dollars to do what I could otherwise do on my own. It just wasn't for me. But I love school, but it wasn't my jam.
Yeah, it's a lot easier nowadays, I think, with that. I mean, YouTube, online learning, there's so many
Yeah.
ways you can really expand without, like you said, tens and thousands of dollars to get a degree that
Yeah.
serves you
For
no.
me, it was like going and living on 500 acres, no electricity, no running water, take a few good books and just go listen in nature and do it that way.
And that story too reminds me, my teacher Alberto, he talks a lot about the disconnection we have from nature.
Mhm.
And his experience was when he was down in Peru, first learning, working with the shamans down there. Every time you would see the shamans or the local people walk in the forest and the birds and the animals, they kept just making normal noise. Everything was good. It's like they didn't even consider the human walking in there.
Yeah.
But the minute he would like step that line into the woods,
Yeah.
everything would stop.
Hmm.
And he was like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Well, they know that you're disconnected. They know that you've abandoned these ways."
Yeah.
And he contributed partly to the whole Christianity belief that he grew up with, getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden. We
Mm.
got kicked out of the garden, and we've let that trauma stay with us this whole time, and we haven't learned that we are still in the garden. We just need to reconnect,
Well, we think we're above it and it's our job we're
control.
stewards of it. Yeah, we're not in the circle anymore. And it's like, that's not really nobody, yeah, that's not really like that's not the jam.
And then with that, so I wanted to kind of touch up on your book too, The Savage Awakening, because I think it's actually a very good book for anyone that's just starting down their path, because you kind of go into great detail of what it's like to be initiated. Um, Obviously, with this book, it's talking about more of the Dragon Mother. And correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of that is I was seeing the Dragon Mother like as Mother Earth. Or were
I
you?
would say that, but
Okay.
you could say that.
Okay. Or what? That was my question. Was what is your, I guess, better terminology? How would you define the Dragon Mother?
So I think the first thing I would say is that getting overly concerned about landing on a definition is not really the approach because as we are pulled toward whatever we're becoming, our understanding changes.
Hmm.
And so wherever like we're met with the understanding for what we have the capacity to understand. And as we change that, we have access to different understandings. And so the deeper intelligence will meet us in whatever our psyche has the ability to allow. So, for example, if you're very in Christian conditioning, which whether you grew up Christian or not, if you're in Western culture, you have Christian conditioning. The Dragon Mother or deeper intelligence might show up for you as Christ consciousness or Mother Mary or something like that. And I think that as we're pulled on these paths, a lot of times we're called to do historical research, we're called to archaeology, we're called to a lot of things to allow the mind to begin to transform so that as we are transformed and we become something more than just human, as we transform, that she can reveal more and more of herself to us. I think that this being is beyond the comprehension of our of our body's ability to hold. And I think that it is deeply personal and also deeply impersonal in the way that truly ancient beings would be. So, if you think of the earth, like in sort of like Greek mythology, there's the concept of the Titans. So that if you look at the Titans and the Olympians, the Titans were the thing itself, where the Olympians are like the guardians of the thing or the representatives of the thing. So like Poseidon is like, if you have like the Titan of the ocean, it is the ocean. Whereas then you have like the god of the ocean is like the guardian of the ocean. It's not the ocean. So you have these truly titanic primal forces that are the thing. So the Dragon Mother is the most ancient, beginning, primal, original source of all things. So that's predates the earth. It predates all things. It's beyond comprehension. And she is the beginning source of all things, the earliest way that we have of relating to whatever this being is. And so anything else would be coming after that. But she reveals herself through maybe avatars or other things that we can more personally relate to. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no,
According to what we have need of. Okay.
I understand. It's again, I come from things from more of a shamanic background 'cause that's where I'm at right now in the journey. So it's the same. I look at when we do shamanic journeying. One of the questions we always get, or I get from people when I'm teaching them, or even I had to my own teachers, was how much is this real? And my one teacher was like, about 90% you're kind of making up in your head, but that's the only way that you can truly comprehend it. So you see it in a way that makes sense for you.
Okay.
You can fully comprehend it, but then there's that 10% of, oh, this is, there's something else out there that's sending me messages.
Hmm.
I kind of,
That really speaks to our need for our own to undergo our own transformation. And I think that that's something that a lot of uh, in our hyper individualistic culture, there's such a focus on self identity and concretizing a self identity of like, what am I? And I think from a more ecosystemic view, understanding the self as a multiplicity and as a part of something, it really requires us to shift the way that we think about the self. So we're not trying, like, I think it is very necessary to go through an arc of individuation and really understanding what you are. That's not the end point of the journey, though. And I think in a lot of Western thinking, there's this idea of like discovering yourself. That is the end point. And for me, that's like very early in the journey
hmm,
of discovering the self and landing on an identity. And I think in Western culture, that is sort of like the apex. Like that's what we're all trying to find, is like, what is my purpose and who am I and what is my journey? And it's like, that's a very, I don't mean this in a condescending way. I mean this just as from a developmental point. That's a very immature
hmm.
part. It's like a very early kind of part of the process. And then once you hit that, now you're at the beginning stage where you're ready to actually now begin to mature. Now you're ready to kind of go on your journey. Now you're ready for like real stuff, you know, if that makes sense.
I think so. I understand what you're saying, and I think it's just part of the process we all have to take, especially to get out of
Exactly.
that
Yeah,
quote coding that we have.
exactly. It's really hard. It's really it's so full of landmines and it's tricksy and it's like there's little loops and pockets that you can just get stuck in so easily where you think you're doing it and then you're just like, "Oh my God."
Oh yeah. No, I still have my days where I'm like, oh, I'm still stuck in this story.
Yeah, totally.
Let me try to work on this and let me focus on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so just to go back a little bit though, so with your childhood growing up, you started this self journey of trying to figure out what human is. How did that affect, relationships or with your family? Did they have any hiccups with that? Did you like, because you said you didn't grow up in that kind of mindset. So did your parents have problems with you kind of looking outside of
Yeah,
what
so
maybe they were teaching?
right. My dad wasn't in the picture. My
Okay.
mom left him when I was 11 months old. Thank God. I met him when I was in my 30s. And the first thing I called her and the first thing I said was, "Thank you so much for leaving him." Like, thank God. And My mom was amazing. She was very much her parenting approach. I don't know how I lucked out with this person, but her parenting approach was I want you to have what you need to figure out how to navigate the world on your own terms without pushing what I think the world is on you. So I want you to know how to find your own answers, carry yourself with pride, treat people with respect, um, respect yourself. You can do anything you put your mind to, whatever you need to know, you can learn in books, before, if this is way before the internet, that kind of a thing. Um, I've always got your back. Respect yourself, respect your body, respect other people. You're not above anybody, like that kind of a thing. But she never expressed her opinions or ideas about religion or anything else, politics or anything. It was like if I showed an interest in something, my mom would find a book or something to encourage me. My mom is an extremely conservative, um, in every sense of the word person, and I was a very like, woo, just what is the world about? Like haul my bike up on the top of the garage and ride it off into a pile of leaves just to see what would happen. And like, I mean, she called me her bold one. And she would just support me and watch me and probably behind the scenes just chew all her fingernails off. So I at one point heard about this thing called God that everybody was talking about, and I was like, "What is this God thing?" And I started wanting to learn what God was. So she would hook up like church dates, so I could go. I went to Pentecostal and Mormon and every form of what was then available of any kind of God. So there was no Hinduism, there was no Buddhism. I mean, where I grew up in a little tiny town in California, it was just various churches. So she would just set up ways for me to explore God and people that I could ask questions of and stuff like that. But she never, I had no idea up until a year ago when I asked my mom, "Do you even believe in God? And can we talk about that?" And so we finally had a conversation because she didn't want to influence me. She wanted me to have my own version of the world. So I feel very lucky. And I started doing energy work. I would practice foot reflexology on her. And then when I was in my early teens, I started doing energy work with humans. And my first thing was I could get rid of headaches. And my mom always had headaches. I think that's probably why I was motivated for that. But she would have a little gathering of people and someone would have a headache and she'd go, "Oh, honey, come do your thing." And there'd be a group of these adults in, the early, like late 70s, early 80s. And there's a picture of me on the couch behind some guy, and I'm like giving him a shoulder rub, but I would put my hands around somebody's head. I say, "Don't tell me where your headache is." And I would put my hands on their head. In a couple minutes, I'd pull their headache out, and then I would get it because I didn't know any better. I would get the headache, and then I would tell them where the headache was, and their headache would be gone. I would have it, and then it would be gone in a second. And nobody said she shouldn't be doing that. That's weird. They would just be like, "Oh, cocktail party trick." you know so I find it now amazing for where I was and at the time that nobody demonized that, nobody made it a problem. I mean, this is an era where my mom was divorced woman, and that it was like wearing a scarlet letter. I mean, she was judged harshly for that, and her little kid is like doing the devil's work, pulling headaches out, and nobody said anything bad about it. Like, it's kind of weird.
Um,
So
it's, I mean, I don't want to say lucky, but I guess to some extent it is because the few people I've talked to so far, their experience was not even close to that.
yeah.
Especially if they're really religious. I mean, it was the devil's work to even
Mhm.
consider talking to a tree or a plant or,
Mhm.
energy healing. So
Yeah.
it's very
My
impressive.
my mom's sister, I had posted something on Facebook a couple years ago, just sharing this very sweet story about the spider when I was 4, and she reached out to my mom and said, is Sadie in the church? Has she been saved by Christ? Because she shared this story, and if she didn't do that in the name of Christ, then she did it in the name of the devil, and like this is a problem. I'm like, no 4-year-old is helping a spider in any kind of way that is anything but pure and beautiful. Like, I am sorry, but like, what is wrong with you? But my mom really was extremely like she put herself in the line of fire and made sure that we did not, my brother and I did not have any of that coming at us. She took the brunt of that. So she made sure that we had the freedom to not take hits like that, she protected our innocence and she protected our creativity and our curiosity. And I have to this day just on my knees thanked her for that. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. She's incredible.
And then with that, does your brother kind of do anything as well, or was it just you being the odd one out?
It was just me.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
He didn't think it was weird. You weren't embarrassing him growing up, or
My brother and I did not have a good relationship.
okay,
He's I I don't really want to throw him under the bus. We don't
no
talk.
problem.
He, I think a lot of people who grow up, um, I think when you're on like in an initiatory journey, when you're a strange souled person, that if you don't grow up in an environment that has people that would say there's a medicine person who would recognize you and take you in and go take you through initiatory processes and help you, that your life itself will initiate you. And I think that a lot of people like that, especially in Western culture, we go through those things in our families. We go through those things in our lives where we have a lot of hardship and a lot of things. For me, the essence of it is you go through experiences that really teach you that you're not special, that really prevent you from developing an ego and an attachment to ideas about yourself that like, so if you have abilities, that you really get prevented from also developing this parallel sense of like, I'm awesome. So we often grow up and wind up in family units that really prevent a feeling of being like special. So you get, various forms of hardship that you encounter. So I had a lot of that in my childhood. And I think my brother was definitely a part of that for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm always curious the family dynamics. I mean, I was kind of the same with my family.
Mm.
My parents did their best. I love them. They did everything they could for me, but we had a very big disconnection. It wasn't until recently that I've started, mending those bridges. Even they weren't broken, but trying to get closer. But even with my own sister, it's kind of the same thing. We talk occasionally, but we're not close. So I'm always curious how it affects people.
Yeah. My
With
my mom my mom and I was very hard for her. Like like she would come home, she's single mom working, we are very poor, we were latchkey kids, and she would come home and maybe like something happened, two wild children, she'd be very frustrated and would yell at us. And I'd write her a little note. I'm like 6, and I would like write her a note, and I have E's that had like 6 stems on it. I'm like trying to write. And I would tell her, if you need to talk, I'll be in my room. Like, I'm sorry you had to yell at us. I know this is hard for you, like that kind of thing. And it would just break her heart because I was very aware, I'm very tuned into that with her. And I think that I was very much like, we are not going to pretend that things aren't happening. We're not going to pretend that this doesn't suck. We're not going to pretend. Had I not done that, I think my mom would have,
mm,
but I've always put stuff in her face. I think in a lot of families, I would have been black sheeped, ostracized, pushed out. My mom is not that kind of person. So even though she would prefer to not talk about stuff, she has always met me there. She won't communicate well about it, but she'll at least hear me out. And in her own way will step toward me rather than away from me. And she's the only one in my family who's ever done that. And I deeply respect that. I don't need her to communicate as transparently as me or whatever, but at least she'll acknowledge it. Um, I remember she didn't get married again until I was like 16, and she married this guy and she was coming home from working full time. He was working full time, she was working full time, and she was coming home cleaning the whole house and making like a 4-course meal and just being like stressed out having to be this kind of like 1950s wife or something. and just being a total stress case. And I wrote her a letter and I was like, I don't know what you're trying to do, but you're making everybody crazy and this is miserable. Please stop. And she just went, oh my God, what am I doing? Like that kind of stuff. We've always had that. And I've been fairly brutal in my communication because I just like, we're just going to be real. And I deeply respect that she has not, she could have chosen to say, no, we're not doing that. And she never has. And she's always stepped toward me. And I have seen a lot of family systems where people will ostracize the truth teller and they reject the person who is not participating in dysfunctional dynamics. And my mom has never done that, whereas other people in my family have.
And what advice would you give to someone who is going through that, where they are getting ostracized by their family or getting pushed out or becoming the black sheep for being the truth teller? What advice would you give someone like that that's going through it right now?
I would say educate yourself first and foremost about things like the drama triangle. Educate yourself about dysfunctional communication and get really clear about eliminating yourself as a variable. So you're really aware of ways that you're participating in that and get as healthy as you can so that I think a lot of times it's very easy to blame the other people that are being dysfunctional and imagine that you yourself are like not. Even like when you're the truth teller, you think that you're pure as a driven snow or something. So just do the work to eliminate yourself as a variable. Really get clear about drama triangles, really get clear about dysfunctional communication, really make sure that you know what your needs are, what healthy communication looks like, things like that. And and then start to build from there and make space for people to not be where you're at and learn how to invite people into different dynamics. Learn how to ask if they would even like to do that with you. And don't expect people to do it the way you do it. And uh, like learn how to notice someone making an effort with you and deciding for yourself if that's enough or if it's not enough and that that's okay too. I think it's just very hard, but I think deal with yourself and learn what healthy communication is and eliminate yourself as a variable, I think, first and foremost.
And with that, so how do you feel about the whole concept of forgiveness? When you forgive others, then you can move forward and, live your own life and shed the past once you forgive others for what they did to you. I have my
I
own
mean,
thoughts on it, but I'm just kidding.
I'm not really, I don't know, I'm not really a fan of that. I think there's times where that's appropriate. I don't think as a general life philosophy that that's useful. I mean, sometimes like I think people should be held accountable for what they do. And I like if forgiveness is like sometimes I think that there are very intelligent, natural, um, deeper reasons that we have feelings that we have about justice,
Hmm.
and that it is like, you know, very right that we feel pissed off or that we feel like that is not okay. And that is ecosystemically very healthy to not allow someone to like be off the hook for a behavior that they have, and it's healthy for boundaries, it's healthy for ecosystems and communities, it's healthy for us for our own um, well-being and our own self-respect. And I don't think that forgiving someone is some secret key to healing. Like I have people that I've never forgiven and it's been very healing for me. It's been awesome. And I like there's a point where it doesn't matter anymore. It's like I don't have some burning poison in my heart because I haven't forgiven people. It's been very like, yeah, it's just part of what life is. There are people that do crappy things that are never going to be okay. And you have to grow your capacity for the fact that there are going to be experiences in your life that are not going to be okay. And I think there's this narrative in Western, because I live in Western culture, there's a narrative that if you do it right, there won't be discomfort. If you do it right, there will be wealth. If you do it right, there is reward. And we're not taught and we don't live in reality, which is that bad things can happen to good people. And no matter how well you do it, you are going to encounter things that hurt, and that we need to grow our capacity, our skillfulness, and our tool set to be able to deal with what life is. There are things that are fundamentally chaotic. There are things that are existentially way too big for us to ever handle. There are things that we are going to encounter that will never make sense to the innocence in us, that will never make sense to the smallness and vulnerability in us, that will never make sense to us on certain levels, that we will never be able to handle. And that's just part of being in a little tiny body on a big freaking planet that is very complex, and that's okay. It's just part of the experience of being alive, rather than, oh, it means something bad and you have to fix it. And oh my God, forgive so that you can have peace. It's like, no, I mean, there's just stuff that you'll never get over. There's stuff that will happen that you need to grow your capacity for and be able to function, and that we are very resilient, and we can live in the paradox of, I'm still alive in spite of this pain that I carry that feels like it should kill me and break me, and like I don't even know how that's possible, and yet here I am. There's a lot of paradox to being a person. It's like, okay, that's why we need friends and community and other practices that allow us to just deal with the fact that we still live even when our little brains are like, "Oh, I shouldn't be able to do this."
No, I
So I'm
agree.
not a big fan. I think forgiveness is fine once in a while. I think forgiveness has its place. I don't think in general forgiveness as a overarching life philosophy has much wisdom to it.
No, I agree with that, and I tell people the same thing. It's
Mm.
my personal beliefs is when you forgive somebody for what they did, you're taking away not only their responsibility, but their own growth to get through it if they want to.
Yeah,
And so by just forgiving them and saying it's all good now, they're never going to learn that lesson they need to learn.
yeah,
And yeah, there is a time for it and a place for it, but it doesn't mean you have to do it. And I see that a lot in the quote unquote spiritual community of, oh, just forgiveness and everything will be fine and you'll get what you want. And
right.
it's the same thing with trauma and going through rough times. That's how we grow. We're never going to grow if we don't have challenges.
Yeah,
Yes, some challenges are more extreme than others and they're horrific to some degree, but we won't grow
yeah,
till we go through them. And we have a lot of I call them kids because, I'm in my late 40s, but it's
mhm,
a lot of the kids growing up now. It's like they don't want to be hurt. They don't want things to go wrong. They expect everything to be this perfect journey. And it's no, you got to go through the suck sometimes. Like we
yeah.
have to go through it.
Well, I think a lot of that is because too that things are so hyper individualistic
Uh,
that people don't have metaphysically or mentally a feeling of this greater net of belonging, that when we are confronted with these very difficult things, I think a lot of people feel like they're the only ones holding them up. There isn't a greater body to disperse that charge, that very, like, emotionally painful charge into. And I think there's so much shame associated with being affected by life. Like, you're not supposed to be affected by life, you're not supposed to show vulnerability. So I think that there's this really messed up loop that a lot of people get trapped in, which is you're supposed to be invulnerable, like, that trope of like, well, people can do what they want, but how you respond is your choice. Like, like, give me a break. We affect each other. We are biologically wired to affect each other, and we are supposed to be in community. But this idea of like, if you're affected and you don't know what to do, that's part of being able to go talk to somebody and say, hey, this thing that you did really affected me. But that needs to happen with the idea that the other person isn't hyper independent and feels like, well, that's your problem, buddy.
it feels
That
attacked.
needs to happen in a community way where the other person goes, oh my God, I feel a sense of accountability for my choice. I don't feel this trope that says, I can do what I want and how you respond is your problem. Right. So I think there's so many things embedded that force people to feel like they're their only recourse. And so it's understandable to me that people are very reticent to communicate. People do cling to these little tropes of like, you have to forgive. because all of these things reinforce this idea that you're alone and that you're supposed to handle stuff by yourself. And we don't have the benefit of like spreading our experience into a broader ecosystem so that we're not getting like fried by what we're encountering.
It's definitely that loss of connection, not just human to human, but with nature and everything else. I mean, you go to a restaurant, you'll see six people at a table who are there eating together, but they're all staring at their phones.
Right.
You know, I'm guilty of it too occasionally. I'm not going to pretend I'm better than anyone else, but
Uh,
or even my own kids. I have a 13-year-old who it's like, hey, do you want to go to the kid's house? No, no, we'll just play online. Like, but no, go to his house, go outside and
Right.
play, go find a
Right.
stick, go do something fun. You don't
Right.
need the video games. Go outside, like
Right.
enjoy nature.
Yeah.
And we've lost a lot of that connection. And in Peru, they call that being an Aini, so being in balance with everything around you,
Hmm.
being fully connected to everything and fully
Right.
understanding your place and your role and working your way to get there because we all have to. It's a struggle, especially here in the Western side, because we have so many distractions. The media is telling us we're going to die every second. You go on social media, if you have an opinion, there's 50 people attacking you and 20 people liking it. Like,
Right.
it's hard to know if you should even talk anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, going a little bit further though on your own journey, so you found that you could communicate, with the plants, animals. You mentioned spirits. Were they like land spirits or were they more like spirit guides? How would you define, your when you say spirit, what is that definition for you?
Um, I don't draw a hard
Okay.
line with it. So, I think they're being seen and unseen. So for me, um, a lot of people would say like a rock communicating with me would be the spirit of the rock, whereas for me, it's just the rock and I having a conversation. Because the rock is very much there. It's a seen being that's communicating. So, but I would have dream teachers or beings that would come in my dreams and talk with me. The dream space is a very potent place between where spirits and humans can talk quite well. It's a really good space for communicating with spirits. But yeah, so I had a lot of dream space beings. So I would say the spirits of the land. I've had a lot of experiences with just getting nudged or guided places when I've gone on, walking around. Um, like I had an experience, I was living in Eastern Oregon on 500 acres and we were 3 miles from the nearest road. There was no electricity, no running water, no vehicle. It was kind of homesteading for a year. It was awesome. And I was inside, it was an abandoned hippie commune, and there was one cabin that was still livable. And I was inside the cabin and I heard the dogs barking, and it sounded like a spray can, like an aerosol, like a spray paint can or something. And I went outside and there was a younger rattlesnake kind of coiled up there's a wood pallet that we put the firewood on, and the snakes were barking at it, and this rattlesnake was coiled up. And what I had heard about rattlesnakes was that when they decided to kind of set up a house or like that they found a place they liked, they would stay there. So I was worried that this rattlesnake was like, oh, this is a cool place under this pallet to live. So I got the dogs in the cabin, locked the door, and I was like, there's a rattlesnake here. So I'm like, what am I going to do? So I just felt this, I guess, guidance. So that to me would be spirit communication. I felt this guidance. It wasn't me thinking.
Mm.
So I crouched down. So the guidance was, you need to communicate with this rattlesnake. So I was like, well, if I'm going to communicate, we need to kind of establish some trust. So I crouched down within striking distance of the rattlesnake because I figured if I can be comfortable within striking distance, that's going to establish a sense of trust, right? It'll diffuse this idea that we're oppositional. So I crouched down and I closed my eyes and I just sat there and I just kept listening. So I was just listening. And then it was like, you need to communicate, So I have words and it's like rattlesnakes don't speak English. And I was like, oh, pictures work. And I was like, oh, thank you. It's like that, like just getting these ideas. So I showed a picture to the rattlesnake of you leaving, everybody's happy, peaceful. You staying, I'm going to have to kill you. Because if you stay, that you're a threat to everybody and I'm going to have to kill you. And then like me feeling very sad, like I don't want to do that. And I sat there for I don't know how long with my eyes closed. And then I felt this like pop. And when I opened my eyes, the snake was gone and I never saw it again. So it's this, that communication is like kind of this arising. There's this feeling of an arising of like, excuse me. It's like an arising of a nudging or an intelligence that I can differentiate from my own thoughts and feelings, of my own felt sense of things. A lot of people, they imagine it like you have this voice in your head that's talking to you, or you literally physically see something.
Mhm.
And I think it's very subtle. And I think people are so disconnected from their bodies that differentiating is very difficult for them when it's there. Um, so it's just like an arising like that. And I can just tell that it's like not me. It's not the sock puppets in my head either. Right. I can just tell that it's not me and I trust it very much. And I've trusted it since I was a child. It's never led me wrong.
Okay. Yeah, I'm always curious about that because some people say they talk to the Fae, some people can see elementals, some people. I was interviewing one guy who he was seeing ghosts in his bedroom when he was 3 years old, and they come to him for help and stuff. So I was always curious how people interact and
Yeah.
how they define it.
Yeah. I mean, again, there are certain beings that have made it very clear um, who and what they are, but mostly I don't worry about it. It's not, I don't really care. Like I can, if they're, uh, helpful and, we have a respectful reciprocal relationship and I make offerings and I don't worry about it. I think a lot of people get really hung up on defining and they want to know like what it is. And I think that it's a lot of times I have seen so many people that I've worked with where they start off and they're like, oh, it's this. And then like, oh, actually it was this. Oh, actually it was this. Oh, actually it was this. Oh, actually it was this, and it's not that interesting. Just for me personally, it's not that interesting. I don't, in my own ancestry, what I've learned through my studies is there's this term, daemon,
Mhm.
not demon, daemon. It means the dead, but it also just means any being of the unseen realm. So it can be the fairies, it can be the ancestral dead, it can be land spirits, it can be what we might call deities, it can be anything. And I just know them as the good neighbors. I know them as the spirits. And, I work with my ancestors. I certainly venerate my ancestors and give them offerings, familiar spirits, things like that. But who shows up and when, I don't worry about it. I give them all offerings and I thank them and I try to stay in right relationship. I ask that they see me with kindness and look upon me as a friend. And that's all I really worry about. Yeah.
I think they make sense. I think, especially for people starting out, and I fall into this trap too, it's easier when you can define it because, oh, this is what it is and this is who I'm working with, whether it's Hecate or, Jupiter or whatever, if you're doing planetary magic versus deity magic, even though it's kind of all, like you're saying, all the same ecosystem, the same.
Well, if you're doing a specific ritual, if you're doing some sorceress things, I mean, I think, yeah, then, like if I'm going to do some planetary stuff, I for sure am like calling out to Jupiter, doing specific things with Jupiter and Jupiter's servants and like spirits that work with Jupiter or something. Yeah. But in terms of like when I'm getting nudged and guided or who comes to me in a dream or something, I don't worry about it. But if I'm doing sorceress acts, if I'm doing magic, then yeah, I will be specific.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so when you're working with I guess we'll call them your day-to-day guides, you mentioned doing rituals and giving them offerings. Is there something specific you do to bring them around? If it's too personal and you don't want to get into it, that's fine too. I'm just curious.
I don't bring them around. We just all kind of, they show up when they're needed and hang out. I don't do anything. I mean, I go to my altar and just do a regular practice of giving offerings and just giving offerings. I've been doing that forever. Um, I mean, I really, right relationship is extremely important, and the ecology of relationships, like any ecology of relationships, is through exchange. Like we bind each other in community through exchange. If you and I were neighbors and I borrowed a cup of sugar and I made a pie, I would give you some of that pie as a thanks for borrowing the sugar. And you'd be like, half of a pie for just a cup of sugar? That's so, oh my God, what can I do for you? And if we kept doing that together, pretty soon there would be so much gift giving obligation between us that we would feel a sense of like reliability, that we're now so indebted to each other that we're neighbors, and like we know that we're there for each other. So I know, like, if my car breaks down across town, I could be like, call you and be like, dude, is there any way you could bring me some gas or something? And you'd be like, sure. And I now have an extension where I'm not on my own anymore. I'm in reliable community. So that's the principle of Gabo in the runes. It's like this principle of gift giving to bind each other in community. It's a very healthy form of obligation. And that's normal and it's natural. It happens everywhere in nature, right? It's like the rain gives to the tree produces things for the earth generates things for other things. Everything is constantly in an exchange that everything else benefits from, right? And so I think a lot of people are in this idea of like, again, this indoctrinated idea of, oh, please show me favor and do things for me rather than exchange. So when I do things at my altar, I'm giving offerings for all the things that I know, but also all the things that I don't know that the spirits are doing for me, all the ways that they're helping and guiding me. So I give offerings. I give Nephalia. I give like honey and water offerings. I will give blood offerings sometimes with just a diabetic lancet. I'll give offerings. I give whiskey. My ancestors, I have a lot of Scandinavian ancestors. Scandinavians show their love through labor, so I might clean my kitchen and offer that to my ancestors. They lose their minds. They love when I clean for them. It's hilarious. I might give cheese, whole cream. I just give a lot of different offerings, and it's very informal. I'll give incense that I've made, my day-to-day offerings, and then I'll give feasts if I have a big request. If I something that I need help with, I'll give bigger, do more formal things. But just that ongoing exchange, that ongoing my part, showing respect, talking about them respectfully, bringing awareness to other people about them, giving offerings on an ongoing basis, just to do my part to keep us in good community, to keep us in right relationship, you know? And yeah, I think that's incredibly important. And I think that a lot of people go, oh, well, I say thank you all the time. It's like that. It's like, can you imagine if, like, I'm borrowing stuff from you, you're constantly giving me sugar and I get to borrow your lawnmower and you come pick me up and fix my car and I just keep saying thank you? Like, your resources are getting depleted and you're doing all this stuff, but what you get from me is just a thank you. Like, over time, like that is not sustaining you, and your situation is you're actually getting materially depleted. You're actually getting drained, and you're putting in so much more effort than I'm putting into the relationship. But our conditioning says you should feel fulfilled and happy, and you should be like not expecting any return. It's all these things that are disruptive and undermining of actual ecology of healthy community. And I'm allowed to just go, thank you so much. Right? Like, that's not healthy. And it doesn't bind us in relationship. And now you're sinking and I'm over here thriving and you get nothing for it. And it's the same thing with spirits. Like, you don't just go, oh my God, thank you. I'm so great. I just tell them thank you all the time. I'm so grateful. I just say thank you prayers. I just tell them all the time, thank you. It's like, that doesn't do anything. That's not, and in some traditions, like I believe it's in England or something, when you thank the spirits, it's insulting to them. There's like a taboo against saying thank you to spirits. It's insulting to them. It's bad luck to say thank you to spirits. Give them whiskey. Don't thank them. Give them a little blood from your left hand on a twig or something. Do not thank them. There's a taboo. And that taboo is there for a reason. There's a lot of wisdom in that taboo.
Interesting. You
Yeah.
know, I've been doing some deep diving in like the Thai occult magic, and there's a lot of give and take too. It's like you want them to do something, but you got to give them stuff in return. And then sometimes you hold out until they do something different, and then you give them a different kind of offering based upon
Hmm.
what the relationship that you build with them. So it's like, I need help with this, I'm going to give you this, or I need help with this, I'm going to give you that. And it's obviously it's very specific for that region and that
Right.
culture.
Right.
But
Yeah.
then with that, so I want to kind of go back along the journey. After you, after the learning how to communicate with the spirits and the rattlesnake difference, and I've noticed online you do a lot of like oils and incense, and I think you have a class coming up called ethical hacking or hexing,
Hexing.
excuse me,
Yeah. Ethical
hexing.
hexing. Yeah.
And I saw you get a lot of not flack, you did get some flack for the word hexing.
Hmm.
So I was curious if you wanted to touch on that a little bit. I understood where you're coming from with it, but
Yeah. Touch on which part of it?
with the ethical, what you consider ethical hexing.
Yeah. So, uh, I really look at this idea of justice, and I think that there's so much the idea of law and the idea of morality. I think a lot of people conflate law and morality with justice. And if you have ever been in a position where you have tried to rely on the law or tried to rely on morality for justice in your life, um, people who have been in that position have seen that those do not equal justice a lot of the times. So it's not only in situations of like, um, I don't know, like there's a lot of situations where the law and morality themselves do not ensure justice. um, there's not always recourse. Like you were talking about forgiveness in
Mm.
situations, there's certain situations that aren't in the purview of law. And there are certain situations where morality just doesn't matter. Somebody can do something that morally it's not right, but they're like, yeah, doesn't matter, right? And so they get away with it. But there are also things like, for example, there are spiritual teachers who are basically like cult leaders, and they're out there being essentially abusive to people and charging them tens of thousands of dollars and humiliating them. But they have a lot of like legal loopholes, they have a lot of protections, and too bad, so sad, right? There's nothing morally enacting justice. There's nothing legally enacting justice there. And 2,500 years ago plus, the way that things used to be was that people had, more. There was, before we got into the age of rationalism and scientism, and there was a lot of more magico-religious stuff was just part of society. It was much more pagan, just part of society. Um, People could go to people to enact justice, to have justice. People could do it themselves. There's a much more person to person relationship with spirits and with lands, and people had means and ways to be able to experience justice. And then you start to see, this is in Western culture specifically, you start to see in like the Greeks do this thing with like they enact the polis and they start to centralize power, and they want everybody to kind of start to think and believe the same thing. And they say, if you want to talk to a god, now we have a priest. If you want to experience justice or whatever, you go through this democracy system, and we're going to have a judge, and we're going to have these things. They start to gatekeep. And what they did when they started to do that is the people that were more of the earth, that were more connected to nature, that worked with the spirits more directly, they started to take those words and make those words bad words.
Hmm.
The Christian church did this too, where they would say Damon is now demon, and anybody who does that is evil. So, it's like an old trick. But they started to do a smear campaign against the poor people, the people who didn't have, they weren't powerful, They weren't in positions of power. And they said the practices that you are doing are distasteful and they're lower practices and things like that. Bad, blah, blah, blah. You need to go to the priest. You need to go to these people to get these things done. And so the ability to have justice, particularly if you were poor, if you were oppressed, if you did not have the right connections, if you didn't have access to these people, the ability to experience justice was taken away from you. And being oppressed and having injustice done to you became much more common, right? So for me, ethical hexing is learning how to have justice when social systems do not allow it for you in certain situations. And I have had many clients who've gone through legal systems who have used the social systems available to them, and they have experienced even more egregious forms of injustice as a result. And it's things that harm us that harm communities, that harm good people in communities and make communities unhealthy. So for me, ethical hexing is something that everybody should know how to do as a way to enact justice. And this isn't punitive necessarily. So I'm not talking about like getting revenge because somebody hurt your feelings. I'm talking about really understanding ways to have justice enacted where people are held accountable for their actions, and it helps the communities reestablish ecosystemic health and balance. That's the essence of what I'm talking about. And there's been such a campaign for so many hundreds and hundreds of years against this idea of people having recourse, to stay oppressed and to stay at the mercy of these systems of injustice. And I just think it's gross. I'm not into it. So I'm teaching ethical hexing, and people can learn how to do that. And there's a number of ways that you can do hexing. And I think that people are adults, and I'm going to teach ethical hexing. I'm going to talk about other ways that you can do hexing if you want to be more vengeful or whatever. I'm not going to teach that, but I'm going to give resources if you want to do that. You're an adult, decide whatever you want to do. I don't care. Like, that's fine. But there is a way to do hexing that is ecosystemically healthy and right, and people should do it.
I agree, and that goes back to that balance because I think people get too focused on that whole love and light. If we're just kind to everybody, the world's going to manifest exactly what I need if I just
Mm.
or 100 times a day in a mantra.
Like the world's your personal vending machine. The
Yeah,
universe is your personal vending machine.
I'm not going to bother solving the reasons I don't have money. I'm just going to keep asking for more and more and hope that it shows up because I'm a kind-hearted person, and why wouldn't I get what I want because I asked for it?
Right.
Versus sometimes, yeah, like you mentioned earlier, bad things happen, and you need to step up and take care of it.
Yeah. And if you can do that in an ecology rather than in an individual mindset, like doing that in an ecology in a healthy, right relationship kind of way, um, gives you a better chance of having your needs met. It doesn't mean you're going to be in a mansion driving a Maserati necessarily, but at least you can pay your bills and eat and have a safe home and keep your family safe and feed your pets and have a car that works and maybe health insurance if you're lucky and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Like
think-
being greedy doesn't serve the ecosystem either, you know?
Yeah, that's that materialistic viewpoint that we're all stuck in here on the Western side of. Got to get the next car. We got to get this. The TV commercials at Christmas of, oh, I just surprised my wife with a brand new car. Like, not going to talk to her about a major purchase before you buy it. Like,
Right. Yeah.
like surprise, we have a loan for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch a little bit more about your book though, because I do think it's a good place for someone to start. Because I do like you talk about the threefold nature of initiation,
Hmm.
the call, the pull, and then the metamorphosis.
Hmm.
Can you touch on a little bit about that?
If I can remember. um, yeah, so I think that in initiation, there's a call where something in us kind of notices, we feel called in some way where we're like, something in my life is no longer satisfying or okay to me. Like I feel restless or I feel I need something different. So that's the call. And then the pull is, rather than like, I need to figure out what I want to do, the pull is like I start feeling drawn to things that are maybe strange or unusual, or I start having bizarre dreams, or I just start noticing stuff that I just feel maybe uncomfortable with, or I feel strangely very drawn by. So I start feeling this pull. And when I follow that pull, it begins to take me into places that it's not linear. So maybe I'm drawn over here. It doesn't mean I'm supposed to land there. It just means there might be something there for me that I need for the next place I'm pulled. Then I'm pulled here, then I'm pulled here, then I'm pulled here. And in the process of getting pulled to these different places to have different experiences or gather different things that we might need, we begin to become transformed. And the metamorphosis is incredibly important because there's a process of what I call becoming undone. And the becoming undone is a process of our own deconditioning, where we have to go through becoming undone, where we're no longer what we were, and the things that are getting deconditioned. So it could be Christian conditioning, Western conditioning, hyperindividuality, dysfunctional communication, ideas of not belonging, disconnection. There's tons of things that we can be undone from. Um, but a lot of it is also clinging to an identity, clinging to staying isolated, right? And then we go through that process of being undone, but we don't know what we're becoming. And there's disorientation and uncertainty in that process. And all of that is very valuable. And it forces us to deepen in these relationships with the unseen and deepen in relationships with the ecosystem, because we get to a point where humans are no longer such a great resource for us. And we have to spread out into other types of relationships in order to survive that transformation. Like we need the stability maybe of a tree, or we need the dream allies, or we need other beings to help us, because humans no longer can sort of continue, at least normal humans. We need strange humans, maybe like you, me, whatever, but those aren't always available for us. And we go through a process of transformation, the unbecoming, and then becoming more than an individual. We become a multiplicity. Right. So that's an entire arc where we start becoming a multiplicity and we lose that sense of the individual self. We become a we. And that is the essence, I think, of initiation, where you become a multiplicity.
And then during that, I think one of the charts you had in the book dealing with that, it was like a spiral. And you were mentioning that, you'd be coming around, you might hit, quote unquote, another dark night of the soul and kind of get through it. You go up or down again through that spiral. I think you called it the something island.
Well, there's the island of initiation and the ocean of initiation. That's a little different than the spiraling.
Okay.
Yeah. So most people never go into the ocean of initiation, and it's not something anybody necessarily really wants to be in. So the spiral is, initiation is not linear. So it's basically like you go start your initiation experience and you're like, whoa, this is crazy. I'm getting the hang of it. Oh, okay, this is amazing. And then you start going down, you're like, oh, this sucks. I'm falling apart. And you feel like you're right back where you started. And you're just like, I didn't go anywhere. I just have the same issues and the same baggage. But if you turn that circle on its side, you'll see that when you go around and you're back where you started, you're just up a little bit. You've actually made some progress. Some things have shifted. And you're just going to keep doing that, where you're going around and around and around, but things shift and change. And what'll happen is as you go through that, you kind of will pop into these different places where you've left old patterns and now you're learning new things and new patterns, and you'll keep doing that and you just kind of spiral around. So it allows us to have a longer view and a tolerance of this idea of like same but different, and it starts helping us develop a tolerance for some paradox and to develop our capacity for the journey, where you have more appropriate expectation, because a lot of people have a linear expectation that once I start changing, I never go back. Once I start changing, it's just progress. Once I start changing, I'm getting somewhere. It's like, no, you just cycle, and there's differences in the cycle, and like chill out. There's nowhere to be. It's like that.
Great. And you
Yeah.
mentioned the island of initiation and the ocean of initiation. So
Yeah.
what's the difference between that?
Yeah, so the island of initiation is where most people are going to have their initiatory experiences in their lifetime, and most people will stay on the island of initiation, which is totally fine. And it's funny because in our culture, there's such a hierarchical view that we always think the bigger or the deeper or the whatever equals better. And so like when I talk about the stages of initiation, I made a social media post once where I talked about the 4 stages of initiation, and most people were like, "Oh yeah, I'm at a 4. Oh, I'm at the 3rd stage." And I'm like, "That really sucks for you. Like, I'm sorry to hear that, you know." But people were like, "Oh yes, I'm at a 4." As if these things are better, right? And so if we step out of hierarchy and we don't look at this idea that like the ocean of initiation somehow means, you know, this thing, and we just get rid of all of those ideas. So the island of initiation is where most people are going to spend the majority of their initiatory experience, if not their entire lives. And it's a very rich, very potent experience of initiation. And what it means is that the ocean of initiation is where you go into a place where your life as a human being is so transformed that you are literally completely devoted to whatever, to the dragon mother or to whatever. You are so transformed that your life is not for you at all. You are essentially what I call like a hound or a slave, like a spiritual slave, not in an enslavement kind of a way. You are so transformed that everything that you do, think, believe, are is in service to, for, and part of this deeper ecology, right? So you're not a householder, you're not raising families, you're not having careers, you're not, you're so in it, and you've done you're doing things that are you're forming pacts with very powerful spirits that can keep you safe when you're journeying into places that are extraordinarily dangerous, so that you can stay safe in those places. And you are doing things that most modern people would find exceptionally unsavory and dangerous and just like insane. And most humans on an initiatory path have no reason to go there. They will not be required to go there. They will not be pulled to go there, and they should not go there. It's not like more powerful and better and like, oh my God, I'm going to do that. But a lot of people will be like, I'm so wild and I'm like in the ocean and you know, the thing is that when you're comparing yourself to people who are like not anywhere near that, you can imagine that you're some you know, powerful sorceress of the deep wilds or something. And I think that's a problem with comparisons. Like, I think people need to leave comparisons outside on an initiatory journey and just focus on the relationship you're in and stop worrying about where you are on the map. Stop worrying about how powerful or not you are. Stop making comparisons because it's irrelevant, and really just focus on humility and focus on what the spirits want with you and focus on growing your capacity and having humility so that you don't get yourself into situations where you get your circuits fried. Don't get yourself into situations where you can literally die. Don't get yourself into situations that are beyond your capacity, where you're going into territory that you don't have the skill, you don't have the training, you don't have the allies, you don't have the ability to get into. So the island of initiation is you can go into some very strange places. You can earn quite great abilities and powers. You can get to incredible places with that without going into the really deep dark depths of the chthonic realms with really powerful, really ancient beings where you have to do some really gnarly stuff to be able to even exist there as in a human body as a human person. So those for me are they're two different realms. And I think most people stay on the island of initiation. They should stay on the island of initiation, and that's it.
I like that. Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it too. I don't know if I'd even want to attempt to go to the ocean.
Yeah, I think most people shouldn't. I really think most people shouldn't. Yeah.
And then, so with that, when you get a client that comes in, like, how do you initiate or start working with them? I
I
guess,
don't initiate anybody.
well, I guess that's the wrong way of saying it. Initiate the work that they need. I mean, they're coming to you, they're initiating what they want, but like, so how do you work with clients? Do you just do you have like a multifaceted practice or do you kind of have some set guidelines? What
Yeah,
should,
so I am currently taking a break from client work,
oh, okay.
and I am on my way to work out of working with clients one-on-one altogether. I've been doing it for so many years, so many decades, that I'm moving into really just looking at being in more of a teacher capacity and maybe doing like group sessions and group work, which I love, but just doing more of a teaching capacity and more mentoring, but not one-on-one stuff anymore.
Okay.
So, but I do body mind integration where I read people's faces and bodies and I listen to how I'm guided in sessions and I listen for how their many different forms of communication are guiding me. And I also do energy work where I just listen like with my hands and I see things and listen and hear things. And then it's like peeling layers of an onion and we're sort of sorting them out cells to soul to sort of see what needs to happen. And I always work with people's bodies and make sure that they're being tended to physically because the body and the mind and the spirit are not separate. And if the body is not functioning well and being tended to, you're going to see a lot of problems and inability to organize and function coherently with the spirit. So I really think the body is just incredibly important. And I've seen a lot of people come in claiming to have spiritual illness or emotional disturbances or psychological baggage that they need to work on. And we just sort their body out. And those things, 90% of those issues align and chill out. So I really rely on the body a lot and the body just getting very integrated into someone's wholeness and really focus on a lot of expose I think a lot of what happens because we are wired for relationship and we are ecosystemically we do belong ecosystemically, we just believe we're disconnected. We aren't actually disconnected. I think a lot of what happens when in my work with people, whether it's reading my book or attending a class or working one-on-one with me, is that when people have an experience of someone who is communicating ecosystemically and seeing them ecosystemically and talking ecosystemically, that stuff in them just begins to get disrupted and shift around. And it opens up space for other possibilities. It's disruptive. It's just fundamentally disruptive. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. And I think if you expose yourself to that enough, it's like if you go out to nature enough, if you're in the wilds enough, it has an effect on you. You don't need to like process the cedar tree and the elk. You know what I mean? If you're just around them enough, that teaches you things and it begins to transform you and have an impact on you. And I think that it's the same kind of thing. Like I don't really feel like I need to do a lot of work with people. I think it's just being disruptive by being ecosystemic and treating them in an ecosystemic way. So I'm not trying to be strategic about like, oh, I'm going to get you to like be in this place. It's more like I'm going to treat you in an ecosystemic way as a person. And that means I'm not playing games with you. I'm not being strategic. I'm not being power trippy. I am going to be heart-centered and kind, and I'm also not going to be functioning from human morality. I'm functioning from ecosystemic morality. So I see you as an accountable adult. I'm not psychologizing you. I'm not pathologizing you. And I'm also not putting up with your shit. I'm not playing games with you. I'm not doing any of that. And there's an immense amount of love and space and capacity for you. And I assume that you belong. And I'm not acting like you don't. And so while you're spazzing out thinking that you don't belong, I'm still here, like, not reacting to that. It's fine. And that has an effect on people's systems. It just has an effect. It's like if you go in nature and you sit still long enough and you stop freaking out about the bugs, like it's okay that there's a spider crawling in the grass. It's like it belongs there. It's fine. If you sit in nature long enough and you let your system stop rejecting it and you sit there long enough, pretty soon the environment starts to go, you're fine here now. And then maybe a deer walks by you and you're like, oh my God. And then the deer's like, oh, whoa, okay, I'm going to go away. And then you just like get back in the environment. And then the deer can walk around you and the birds can come and play around you. And you're like, this feels amazing. And it's like, right, that feels amazing. There's no otherness there. You don't need to keep othering yourself, right? And I think that we're so wired to this idea of teacher, do something to me, do something for me, make things sparkle, impress me. I want to have an experience. That I think it's very hard for people to understand, like, you need to expose yourself to things that allow your system to settle into its own belonging and not expose yourself to things that continually remind you that you're a problem.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people are choosing teachers and systems and methodologies that are constantly reminding them that they don't belong and that they're a problem. Just the idea of, like, I need to go get fixed, I need to go heal, is reminding us that we don't belong and that we're a problem, you know? And I've never had an experience in nature where anything in the environment is telling me I need to fix myself and I don't belong until I love myself or until I deal with my baggage with my brother or until I whatever. It's like, you're fine here. Just don't harm and disrupt things in an unnatural way. And it's like, you're fine, you know? I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. I mean, it makes
Okay.
perfect sense. I mean, I've had that experience too with clients coming in, and I've seen this healer, I've been to this person, I've done this, I've done that, I've done this, and part of me is like, what do you expect me to do?
Mhm.
Versus, uh, are you just addicted to the idea that you need the healing, or is there actually something going on? Because I've had some people who, and it doesn't happen often, so I don't want to say it's all the time, but I had one client who were working together, and while we're working, she came to me for one specific issue she wanted to work on with her mother. But before every session, it was, oh, I want to work on this. I want to work on that. I'm like, well, let's go back to what you initially said. That's the root. That's your story. Let's focus on your story.
Mhm.
She wasn't ready to work on that. So I was like,
Mm,
okay, well, I'm not going to keep wasting our time
mm,
if you're not ready to work on it, because no amount of other clearing or quote unquote healing we do is not going to help you until you focus on that story. That's your initial wounding. That's what we call it, the original wounding.
okay.
And even my own teacher, he's like, we don't heal, we just help remove and clear space so that they can heal themselves. We're not healers. We just remove blockages or help them remove blockages so that they can do it themselves. So I
Mhm.
don't even like putting that term when I talk to people, but sometimes that's the only term they understand. So
Right.
it's like, yeah, you can come to me for a session. I'm not healing you or just working together and try to clear out whatever's holding you back is kind of what I look at it.
I think sometimes, I think in a lot of I think a lot of times people don't have permission to be non-hierarchical. They don't have permission to have sovereignty. They don't have permission to have power. They don't have permission for any of those things. And I think sometimes when people come to us, initially forming those relationships where there's a hierarchy, and then the person in the hierarchy who is like above them then says, I don't, you know, I can see you here and we can find a way to be respectful where I can still help you, but where you can claim your sovereignty and you can come into your own power and your own belonging and you can step out of the hierarchy. And I think that's very tricky territory
Mm.
because a lot of people, you know, we tend to balance through extremes. So if someone's been feeling powerless, the second you acknowledge their sovereignty, they might then go, oh, I don't need you. I'm more powerful than you now. Like you gave me acknowledgement. So now, like, what do you have to offer me? And they'll balance through extremes where suddenly they're now more powerful than you. And I think a lot of people don't understand how to not be in a power trip because our society functions so much on it. And I think that's very delicate territory to be in with people is to get to a place of belonging rather than hierarchy. And I think it's very, very tricky territory to navigate. And I think that most humans don't do that very well. And I think it takes a long time. And I think it takes a lot of trust and it takes a lot of vulnerability and it takes a lot of humility. And I think some people are so defended and so guarded and so mistrustful and they've been so um, either unhelped or so screwed over that they just at a very level they just at a very deep level can't allow that to happen. And that's like when I see that, I'm like, I really think traditional therapy would be better for you first before you try this sort of deeper ecology thing, you know? If they just resolve some of those more surface human layers, work through that more very like human psychology part first and tend to that.
I mean, close that.
You're a very musical situation over there.
Yeah, I was so shocked me too. I was like, you're in this deep meaning talk, and it's like, doo doo doo. It's like, ah.
It's just it's a soundtrack.
Thought I turned everything off, but there's always one thing that gets through.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, no, I like that. I do want to start be mindful of the time, so we're getting close to the 2 hour mark, which it's been a good conversation. I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Um, so I guess on this last piece, we kind of touched on it earlier with just initiation overall, but is there any other advice or anything you'd want to say someone again who's just starting out or maybe has gone through the motions, they're going through their spiral, they're in that island. You know, is there anything they can try to do to help center themselves better or any practices they should look at? You know, maybe they're generic enough where anyone can try them.
Yeah. I think that having, first of all, I would say keep an evidence journal. So an evidence journal is, I cannot emphasize just like how freaking great this is. An evidence journal is, it helps to get over indoctrination, whether it's scientism, hyperrationalism, religious indoctrination, family indoctrination, anything. And what it is where you keep a journal of things that you actually experience because you won't remember it. And so an evidence journal coupled with an altar practice is a phenomenal combo. So an altar practice is um, I love recommending that people work with their ancestors. So it's basically like you go to your altar, you light a candle, you invoke your ancestors, and you can. I like to ask people to go far enough back where they're invoking ancestors that have kind of worked through their stuff. So these are ancestors you haven't met probably 500 to 1,000 years ago. They're well ancestors, they're there to help you, and you just call on them. And um, I just say, so this is very simple. I light this candle in remembrance of my ancestors. And I say, ancestors, please accept this offering. Though your names and deeds have been lost through time, you yourselves are not, for you live on in me, and I love you, I honor you, I remember you, and I am proof that you existed. Please accept this offering. And I'll give them a little incense or I'll give them whatever. It's very, very simple.
Mm.
And sometimes I'll give them a little feast. So the first time I did this, I went to my altar. I called out to my ancestors. I told them who I was. I told them what my intention was, and I gave them a little meal. And I swear I felt I'm going to get emotional. I felt this joy of being remembered. I don't know how long it had been since anybody had given them anything.
Mm.
I just felt this joy at them being remembered. And so just something that simple. And then I started to do this every single day. And I would go to my altar and I would tell them things I was struggling with. I would ask for help with certain things. And I have these these 300-page altar journals, and I would write down my altar sessions. And then something would happen that would be a direct response to something that I had shared with my ancestors that um, was like freakishly specific and helpful. And then I would write it down that there had been a response. And then I would go back and give them a thank you. And this is not transactional. This is not, I'm giving you a feast to pay you to do this for me. This is, thank you for listening. And giving things of our world gives them sustenance of our world so that they can enact things in our world, right? And then I would give them something saying, thank you so much for helping me. This is that reciprocity. And keeping that evidence journal. And then what happens is as you write these things down, you start getting this collection of evidence that there's something there, evidence, because you can't see them, right? And we are taught that it's not real. We're taught that these things don't exist. There's no proof. This is sock puppets in your head. It's wishful thinking. It's magical thinking. You're doing it because you can't handle reality, whatever. But when you start to have, 10, 20, 30, 100 pages of I go to my altar, I share with the spirits what's happening, and then I have these things. And some of them, like I went to my altar, I had just moved to Olympia from Seattle. I didn't know anybody in Olympia. All of my clients were up in Seattle. I needed to get out of a city. I don't belong in cities. I moved to the country. And this was before COVID when people weren't really doing Zoom. And I didn't really have clients down here. And I was like, for the first time in my 20s, I didn't know if I could pay rent. And it was 3 days before my rent was due. And I was like, what the hell? I'm in my 40s and I don't think I can pay rent. And I went to my altar and I said, you guys, I don't know, to the spirits, I was like, I don't know if I can pay rent. I don't know how I'm going to come up with rent money in 3 days. I devoted my life to being in service, to working with you. I'm going to hand this over to you. Please take care of it. I can't figure this out. And if you guys want me to work with you, I can't be dealing with this stuff. Please take care of it. And I gave them a very generous offering. I woke up the next day to an email from this very dear woman who has since passed away, lovely woman, said, "Hey, Sadie, I don't know if you do this. I don't know if you've checked your PayPal. I don't even know if you do this, but I bought an entire year's worth of sessions with you for monthly sessions. I just went ahead and did it. I hope it's okay." And my rent at the time, what she sent me was $125 over what my rent was for like her 1 year worth of sessions. And I was like, I never would have thought of that. And I was like, "Oh my God." And she had purchased it like 5 hours after I had gone to my altar. And I went back to my altar and laughing, and I was like, "You guys, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. I didn't even imagine that." And this is why we don't, anyway. So that went in my evidence journal. And I've had things like that over and over and over. And, one-offs, you might forget them, whatever, but you keep that evidence journal and you start to see that as we call out, there is something reaching back to us. And it gives you actual, tangible, substantial proof that there is something happening. So you're not left to your critical mind that will erase those moments, that will forget those moments. And I have hundreds of pages of relational documentation that there's something happening. So now I live in my psyche, my mind, and my body live in a very relaxed state where I feel so supported by what I imagine like people who grow up in really healthy families that have means that just have their back. So they're out in the world and they know no matter what, their family will have their back. Like how much ease you must have in your psyche if you had a family like that. Like that's kind of how I live is I just know that I'm cared for. I know that it's okay because I have decades of proof. I have hundreds of pages of proof that when I really need it, that things are okay. And I've had near death experiences of I was in a car situation where we were supposed to turn down this road, but we were chatting and she kept going. And I said, "Oh, that's our turn off." And she went, "Oh, and turn." But the car, we looked like we were passing. So this truck pulled out and she went to turn and he was coming right at us on my side. And it was one of those really big, like country trucks
Mhm.
and just coming right at my side. And I was like, we're going to get hit. And I just yelled, "Stop." And it was like everything just stopped. And his truck was like this far from my window. And the guy gets out and he goes, "Yes." We get out and we were all like, how did that just happen? We just stopped. And it wasn't like I have power and I stopped. It was that the spirits responded and just did something physically impossible. There were no skid marks. There were no, I mean, it was like everything just stopped. And we were all like, what the hell just happened? Evidence journal,
Mhm.
right? I was probably 22, 23 when that happened, right? The rattlesnake thing, evidence journal, just that there is an ecology of relationship and there are things that are happening that we don't, that our modern minds can't explain, and yet they exist. So I think that is the most powerful, simple thing anybody could do. And if you couple that with an altar practice, with asking for things and making offerings and just documenting what's happening over time, you will have accumulated a mass of proof and evidence that this is very real, and your whole system and your brain and your conditioned self will just get out of the way and your whole system will relax into it and you can just get on with things.
Like that, yeah. I have a altar for, a family altar, but I haven't tried going that far back. And I guess with the altar, so if someone's just starting out, what's your recommendation for a good starter altar? Obviously, you can make them as elaborate as you want. You can make them super simple. Do you have a recommendation of where it should be in the house? Like anything?
I really am like, you know, I am very much like a dirt person, and I'm very much like, I think people make things way too fussy. I think about our ancestors who, like use what you have available. Don't make stuff fussy. I'm not a fussy person. If you like fussy stuff, do it. Be creative. Go how the spirit moves you. Like my altar is I got a one of those shoe things from Amazon. It has like two things. It's like a shoe tray that you get in your closet, and I put a really pretty scarf over it. But I have there's a top space. It's probably like this wide and this long, and then there's another shelf underneath it that I can store supplies on, and then I put stuff on the floor. And I like to sit on pillows in front of it. It's like it's an Amazon shoe thing. I was looking for something, a table, and I was like, "Oh, that's exactly perfect for my needs." So, and it was like $20, and I just sit there, and it's facing south. It's supposed to face north, but that's the only wall I have in my house because it's got too many windows. So it's like, whatever. If I do ritual that requires facing north, I'll do that. But otherwise, that's what I got, and it's my all purpose altar. So because I do ancestral work there, I don't put pictures of any living beings on my ancestor altar. Um, but I do everything there. Some people feel they need different altars for different things. I don't. It's a constantly evolving living being. So as it needs to change, I change it. And I think let yourself, it's a place to be creative and joyful, and it's alive. So if you feel moved to put something beautiful on there or to move it around or whatever, don't be too precious about it. Let it be alive and let it call you and pull you and teach you and tell you what it needs. I think candles are beautiful, but if that's not your jam, it's not your jam. Like a little dish, a little cup to put liquids in, a little dish to put food on, little sand inside of I use my great grandma's teacups for my offerings and stuff because I just, it's my great grandma's stuff. She's dead and I love using her things. I have things people have given me, and I use an incense burner from the 70s that my mom had when I was a kid that I have fond memories of, and I for my incense burner, or have some sand in there. I think just don't be fussy about it and let yourself start wherever. And if it's like if you have a dresser and you just put a little doily on it to designate that as your altar space, fine. Let that be your altar space and just put, you can get a little candle holder that's like a little ceramic thing for $1.50 and buy those little chime candles that are, 4 inches tall. Just stick that in there. Fine. Doesn't matter what color it is. Doesn't matter. Just have a sincere heart. If you give an offering, all you have is water. If you offer water with a sincere heart, it will be received by the spirits. It's fine. It's literally fine. If you go for a walk and you find a little tiny stone, ask the stone permission to take it, but then put that on your altar. It's fine. Just start wherever you are and I think there's so much emphasis in Western culture on you have to know and you have to do it right. And I think the thing with working with spirits and being in relationship with spirits is that they know that we're disconnected from these. Many of us are disconnected from these lineages. We're disconnected from knowing we have no idea what the heck we're doing. And they start off, I find most spirits are very patient and very gentle with us. And as long as we're making effort and we're being sincere and we're trying to educate ourselves and we're doing the best that we can, that they will be very patient with us in the beginning and they'll let us know when it's time to step it up. They'll let us know when they're like, okay, kid, it's been enough. Like you got to step it up. You need to come like once every cattywampus times. Now you got to start coming more frequently. Now you need to come weekly. Now you need to do it daily. Like, come on, step it up. They'll let you know. They'll let you know.
Perfect.
So I think just relax, be artistic, be creative, be whatever your little brain needs it to be. If it needs to be very like engineer, boxy, whatever, go for it.
Nice. No, I agree. That's usually my advice too. It's some people
Nice.
want to go out and get some sort of altar cloth, 500 candles, all these deity statues. They'll go down to the local metaphysical store and just buy everything up and try to make this huge wall of offerings. And then they get so confused or worried about doing it right and trying to make
Right.
it work. I tell people, like, just light a candle if that's all you
Right,
got.
exactly. Let's just light a candle
Just
and
light a
start
candle.
simple. Because as you get into it, like if you invest all that money and then you find out that like it's not Hecate or it's not Bridget or it's not whoever, and it's not a druid path, it's not this, it's like start simple and then let them pull you and then they'll tell you like, hey, you need to go get a snake or you need to go get this or you need to get that. My altar now is like I have an entire huge wall with stuff all over it and a bookcase with all my it's like it's a whole production in there, but it started simple,
Nice.
you know?
So before we wrap up, I want to give you a chance to just let anybody know where they can find you if they're
Yeah.
interested in your work. I mean, obviously, you got your books, your classes coming up, your Oracle deck. I thought I actually missed the chance of getting that because I think you did like a
Oh, you can
Kickstarter
get
for
it
that.
now.
Yeah, I saw
Yeah, yeah.
last night. I saw it was on there, so
Yeah.
recommend people try to get that as well.
Yeah, thank
Is there
you.
any other place they should reach out to you besides your website? I'll put everything in the show notes too.
Yeah, so just my website and you can find out like what I'm up to on my website. I'm putting like my current class, Ethical Hexing is on if you just go to thedragonmother.com, it's right there on the homepage. You can find the link there. My shop, my Oracle deck, everything's on my webpage. I do have a YouTube channel, Sadie Whip. I'm taking 3 months off from client work, hopefully more. I want to start getting more YouTube stuff going and more content creation and more classes going. So, yeah, and the ethical hexing is February 19th. It's live online. There's a workbook and class recording. So if it doesn't work with your time frame, it's 6 to 8 p.m. PST. So if that doesn't work with people's time frame, there is a class recording for all my classes. And yeah, everything's just on my website. I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook. And I try to do a lot of free content and I am very devoted to keeping my things as affordable as I can. I often have scholarships available. I'm really not into uh high ticket like stuff. I totally am whatever people can do that. I just like things to be accessible. So I'm very devoted to figuring out how to be able to live myself. Like I still can't afford health insurance because I'm coming out of a very long illness and I haven't been able to work very much. So I'm just now feeling good, which is a big part of taking time off so I can get back to generating income to be able to afford like basic things. But I'm very into accessibility and stuff being affordable for people and not charging a, a lot of the capitalist kind of ways of doing things. So I've been putting a lot of my time and effort into figuring out systems that work more based on like a community where people give, everybody pays like a little bit, where it's not one person pays $10,000, which people do. Not one person pays $10,000 and I sell it to like 20 people paying me $10,000, but like maybe people pay $135 or $35 and it's spread out over more people. And that way it's like we all get to be together in community and making things more affordable. And so I'm working, that's the way that I'm working, and I'm really hoping that that can pan out. I've been told that if you don't charge money, people don't think that it's going to be worth anything. And I'm really just hoping that that's not the case. So that's what I'm working on. And I've been told that my content is rich and dense and people get a lot of value from it. So I'm hoping that that's the case and that we can do something a little different together as people and not have to play that game.
Nice. Yeah, I've been following you on Facebook for a couple of years. Like I mentioned before we started, Bros introduced me to you.
Mm.
And I got your book, but to be honest, I was on the reading pile for a while. And then I was like, oh, now it's the time to brush it off. Like, I buy lots of books and they sit in the reading pile. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'll get to it. I promise. It just takes me a while sometimes.
Well,
But
it's
no,
also nice to just have those energies surrounding you. It's just good to have in your space. You know, that adds something, I think.
yeah, I mean, I got nice bookshelves. They're
Yeah, they're
full.
beautiful.
I've read half of them.
Nice. That's awesome.
Working on it. It's hard with two kids.
Heck
It
yeah.
really gets difficult once you start having kids. I
Yeah.
used to read all the time, but yeah.
That's what when you get my age, that's what that's for. Your kids will be out of the out of the house and stuff, and you can start catching up on things when you get my age.
Yeah, soon. I think I got another 10 years before I'll get to that point.
How old are you?
I'm 44.
Yeah, I'm 56. So
Okay.
yeah, when you're
Yeah, about
my
to
age. Yeah.
Perfect. No, but I appreciate your time and it was a good
Yeah, thanks for
conversation.
coming. Yeah, this has been really lovely.
Perfect. Thank
It was
you.
nice meeting you finally.
You too.
Yeah. Be well and good luck with your podcast. I'll tell people, and please let me know when it comes out, and I'll promote it and everything, and let people know about you.
Perfect. Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Shaman Stories podcast. If you have any interest in the services that I provide or the services of my guest, please click the link in the show notes below. Thank you. And until next time, have a good journey.